All right. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the Foundation has been able to accomplish in the very short time since we've been up and running, and also some of our future goals. So Node has 100% year-over-year growth. This is the number that we've been able to correlate through every number that we can possibly find. When we look at growth in users and packages, in GitHub uniques and website traffic, everything points to we double every year. And we've been doubling every year for quite a while, and we're pretty sure that we're going to double next year as well. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of ramifications of that that we're still trying to figure out. Like what happens when half of your users every year have only been using the software for a year. There's a lot of challenges that come with this. But we think that we've figured out some models around core that really work, because now the Node.js project proper gets about 50% of its monthly contributors brand new to the project. They've never contributed before. And I think people remember that the contributions at one point were kind of waning. And now we've done a lot around policies. We've done a lot about breaking things into smaller components in order to get people more engaged in the project and to convert users. And now we're actually converting users into contributors faster than even the user community is growing, which is growing at a mind-boggling rate. So when we define our community and we try to figure out how to continue to grow it, we end up with kind of 3 buckets of people, right? We have people that are using it. We have our users. We have some section of those users that decide to become contributors. And then we have some section of those contributors that end up becoming leaders and to some extent decision makers in the project. So when we think about these groups of people and how to convert them, how do we convert people into users? Well, people try to use software. They locate whatever resources that they can find that appeal to them in order to learn the software, and then they become users. Some amount of those users will try to make a change to the software. They'll work through whatever the process is for contributing. They'll drop out. They might stay with it. They might not. But hopefully what they do is they get a change in, and they decide to come back and contribute again to the project. And some number of those contributors are going to invest enough time contributing to the project that they're valued as a decision maker. And we need to make sure that we give them some kind of shared ownership over those decisions so that we can continue to grow the number of leaders and the number of people making decisions in the project so that it can continue to scale. All right, so how is Node doing this conversion? Because we're doing it pretty well now. Well, we create more users through education. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're encouraging users to contribute through what we're calling liberal contribution policies. I'm going to get a little bit more into that as well. And we enable more of these leaders by participatory governance practices, which I'll also get into in a second. So we get a lot of complaints about education. I think like the people working on core are the most upset about the state of documentation and education around core. What we end up, when people talk about how they learn Node, they end up piecing together all of these crazy blog posts and different internet resources and just all these random touch points. And they turn it into some kind of stack of education, and then they come to the project that way. And we've been thinking of this as a negative for a really long time, but we're actually starting to realize that it might be a positive. What we end up having is all of these different resources that actually appeal to people that learn in different ways, because they end up getting created by people who also learn like that. Node School is one of the most successful things that we've done in terms of education in the Node community. And Node School is kind of interesting because Node School has 2 components that appeal to 2 entirely different kinds of people. There's an online resource that you can download and learn yourself, and if you get hung up, then you can ask a question in like this global community on GitHub. But there's also like 150 local chapters around the world that run regular, in-person, hands-on sessions with the same materials. And they walk people through problems when they hit them, and they onboard them into a local repository for that meetup, and they create their own support system. And this is a way to use the exact same kinds of materials, but to advance 2 totally different kinds of users that learn in different ways. And we're continuing to improve that documentation, and we're also considering new resources. There's some resources that the community can't create, and maybe we need the foundation to step in there and start building out some of those resources so that we can reach even more users. Educational materials need to be a wide variety and a diaspora of things. This isn't like code where we solve it once and then we can just go back to that and send everybody down that path. That's not how people learn. We need to have materials that appeal to everybody. Okay, so what are liberal contribution policies? We just went through the process of creating a new incubator program. And this was an interesting exercise for us because a few of us in the project have gotten kind of good at building out these contribution agreements. We have different contribution policies really for almost every repository that has a lot of activity throughout the Node project. So it's very different to get code into the website than it is into core. But we've had to go back and kind of coalesce what the values of those policies are, because now we're looking at bringing in new projects, and how do we teach them and train them on how to create these policies, right? When you look at incubation projects at other foundations, what you find is that they have a codified process that is how they teach their values to new people. We can't do that. We think that we want to teach them these values so that they're competent and they can remain autonomous and own their own processes. So this has origins going back to open source. And if you've been following Rod Vag or the Level Up project ever, you might be familiar with this. But essentially, it flips the normal guarding of commit rights on its head and says, look, you can't really mess anything up that bad in Git. Why don't we just give everybody who sends in a significant contribution commit rights? Just onboard them into the commit process. They're not going to have release rights yet. There's still going to be a set of people that do the releases, but we can really encourage this community if we just liberalize the access to those commit rights. And also, every commit, even by an established committer, even by the creator of the project, should go through the same review process that everybody else goes through. So no matter what your status is, you're not above being reviewed and going through the regular process. And it puts everybody on the same footing, and it allows new contributors coming to the project to see that they're being treated just like everybody else. As we built out more and more of these policies throughout the project, we ended up codifying on 3 key values that we're now going to try and teach to other projects that we're bringing into the foundation. That's participation, transparency, and efficacy. These aren't absolutes. There's no such thing as being 100% transparent or 100% efficient. And in a lot of times, these values bump up against each other. You have to make trade-offs and decide, like, well, actually, we have this thing that we really need to do for efficiency because, for instance, in the Node core project, we get code into master, and then that commit in master needs to land in all of these other branches in order to make it into releases. That process wouldn't be manageable if we didn't have really clean commits, clean single commits with clean metadata attached to them. So we end up having to squash commits. We can't use the merge button. All of that's a barrier to entry for new contributors, but it's a trade-off that we have to make in order to keep the project efficient. But on the website, where we don't have to make that kind of trade-off, when you get it into master, it just deploys. We don't have those kinds of policies. We can use the merge button. So allowing each individual project to make these kinds of decisions and to balance these values is really important. So participatory governance. So we've created a new structure under the foundation for governing bodies of what we're calling top-level projects, but also the TSC that manages sort of the entire technical side of the foundation. We didn't start from scratch. We looked at a lot of other projects and what they did, and we sort of started to figure out what works for us. But essentially, the Node Foundation is an independent entity. Starting out independent really helps and encourages new contributors and gives people a real sense of ownership. And that foundation grants autonomy over all of the technical governance to these technical bodies. So the board of directors is not going to meddle in decision-making around the technical side. They're not going to tell you that you can't get your commit in or that this feature isn't good or whatever. They're not going to have an opinion on promises. We don't want to start that up. And the project leaders are the people that are trusted by the contributors. And then those people, via some process, and this varies from project to project, they end up getting added to the governing body. So usually they're just nominated by the whole set of contributors, and then they're voted in by the existing governing body, which is usually the TC or the TSC. And then we have a few rules that protect this body from undue influence, either undue influence by a single individual or undue influence by a company. So we use the consensus-seeking model. That's not pure consensus. Pure consensus is where everybody gets a veto. It means that if I don't want something to happen, I'm far more enabled than somebody who wants to make something happen, because my ability to say no to anything is of very, very high value, and I have very little incentive to convince everybody else that I'm right. So with consensus seeking, what we're doing is that we're trying to move towards a consensus. We're trying to reach a consensus. But if we can't, we'll just have a majority vote over it. That threat of a vote is enough incentive for everybody participating to want to convince their peers. The success of this has been tremendous in that, like, we argue all the time and we disagree all of the time, but we've never actually had to go to a vote. We've always been able to find a creative solution that everybody can be happy with. No more than 25% of any TC that's a governing body can be affiliated with one company. This is really important because there's a lot of companies that can dump a lot of money and resources into creating great contributors who contribute really well to the project, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing for the project to have 10 or 20 people from a company working on the project as long as they're getting good work done. But you don't want the entire governing body to be dependent on one company because that company could just make a decision not to invest in that technology anymore. So if we want these institutions to be sustainable, we have to worry about this. And this is a new one, and it's not one that I know of in any other projects, but it's one that we came to based on feedback from all of our existing contributors, especially those that are international. And that was that every governing body needs to have at least 4 people from different time zones in it. And that was because as we continued to move along in the project, we would start to get more heavy in certain decision-making around meetings, and certain people started to worry that at some point they're just going to be cut out of this process because they live in a time zone where some of these meetings are just impossible to get to. So we want each of these bodies to be aware of these issues and be inclusive of people in a global community, so we've created this rule as well. So what are we doing in the future? We're going to end up creating more educational resources. Probably things like training programs, certification programs, stuff that the community is not just going to go out and do on their own, that we really do need an institution to step in and do. We're going to continue to spin off more working groups. We're going to continue to cut core up. Contributions are still flowing in. We're still getting more and more every month. It's just tremendous. And that just isn't manageable without delegating responsibility. And so we're going to continue to see more working groups in the core project, as well as bringing in new projects into the foundation that then the existing group of contributors can mentor and turn into more participatory software. And we're going to bring new projects into the technical governance of the technical side of the foundation. So if you were in the board panel earlier, you saw that the board oversees a lot of the administration of the budget and a lot of the legal and marketing stuff, and all of the technical decision-making is in this autonomous side. Well, the people that govern that are called the TSC, and a lot of different technical projects are going to end up being under them. So we want to make sure that that TSC is representative of all of those interests and not just core. And that's all that I've really got for you. It's been nice.